Chapter 751. The Royal Family of the Wu Kingdom? The expression on Li Yi's face had already turned into one of astonishment. This world was completely different from the history he knew, including the current countries and all kinds of major events that had happened in history. Since the wheel of history had gone awry, he couldn't find anything that he could refer to. Of course, last time he had stored all the books in xuanhuan library in his head, so he was not unfamiliar with the current situation of the surrounding countries. There were a total of 3 countries that directly bordered the Jing Kingdom. Needless to say, the Qi Kingdom and the Zhao Kingdom had been in constant conflict with the Jing Kingdom in history, and the current situation was still a little tense. The other country was the Wu Kingdom. Although the Jing Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom could not be called allies, there had not been much conflict before. For decades they had not invaded each other. The 4 countries had always maintained a delicate balance between them. The Qi Kingdom was indeed powerful and ambitious, so it was guarded against by other countries. But it was impossible for it to be the enemy of several countries at the same time. Even if the Zhao Kingdom cooperated with them for a short time, they had their own ideas, and it was impossible for them to be of one heart and one mind. The relationship between the Jing Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom had always been stable. For a long time, there was not much difference in the strength of the 2 countries. However, several years ago, a certain prince of the Wu Kingdom launched a coup without any warning, killed his brother and father, and sat on the throne himself. Since then, the Wu Kingdom had been in a long period of turmoil. The loyal officials in the court were either dead or hiding. Several generals guarding the border, with the reason of bringing order to the chaos and supporting the legitimate wife, gathered troops and rebelled against the court. There were also countless rebel armies in the country, forming a group of heroes and forming a separatist regime, which gave the current court of the Wu Kingdom a headache. These words were once again confirmed by the sloppy old man. Li Yi had known for a long time that Monster Su was from the Wu Kingdom. However, when one's martial arts cultivation reached such a realm, most of them would choose to go out and travel in order to make a breakthrough in their lifetime. As a result, the concept of countries and the like was much more vague. After the former emperor was assassinated, Empress Wendy also committed suicide. After gaining power, the second prince killed the crown prince with a cup of poisoned wine. Empress Wendy's youngest son and the 14-year-old princess Duanrong disappeared. They must have been hidden by the ministers loyal to the former emperor. The sloppy old man just narrated slowly without any extra expression on his face. How could that old fellow Xuanhuan just watch such a thing happen? Did something happen to him? Li looked at him and asked with a frown. Su means, the sloppy old man said, Yang is the surname of the Wu Kingdom, and that little girl knows Xuanhuanli's famous technique. Even if she isn't a member of the royal family, she must be related to that old fellow. This was all he could get from the sloppy old man. Li thought for a while. Although she was young and was good at doing those rough jobs, if he thought about it carefully, he would find that apart from these things, she always seemed to hide some kind of temperament. Inadvertently, it overlapped with a girl who liked to eat egg fried rice. The next time he entered the palace, he would ask the eldest princess about the situation in the Wu Kingdom. The royal family must have some secret ancient books that he couldn't see. When Li Yi walked back, he glanced at the tightly closed door of Mississippi Lu's room and felt a slight headache. Her only disciple had left without saying goodbye. She definitely wouldn't feel good in her heart. Furthermore, she was the kind of person who kept everything in her heart and wouldn't tell anyone. Even if he wanted to make her happy, he didn't know how to break through from this angle. Rui was like this when she was young. She kept everything in her heart. When father and mother left, she didn't cry. She didn't eat or drink. She just sat by the bed in a daze for 3 days. Rui looked at him and shook her head. If she has something on her mind, she won't listen to anyone. Li Yi showed a helpless expression and said, if she keeps it in her heart for a long time, it will cause problems. Don't worry, husband. I'll talk to her tomorrow. Rui smiled and brought the wooden basin over. She put it by the bed and tested the temperature of the water. She said, husband, soak your feet first. Ever since Rui got pregnant, she was not allowed to intervene in any of the family's matters. With her physique, as long as she was not fighting another grandmaster, she would not be affected at all. However, this was an order from the old mistress. Xuanhuan followed her every day because the old mistress could not stay idle and wanted to do something. She had cried a few times. However, during the days when Li Yi came back, she would fetch a basin of hot water every night and wash his feet personally. Li Yi looked down at her delicate side profile. His eyes were in a trance and he suddenly jumped off the bed. Rui seemed to be a little scared. She looked up at him and asked in confusion, husband, you used to wash my feet. Today it's my turn to wash my wife's feet. Li Yi looked at her and pointed to the bed. He said, "Sit down." "How can I do that?" "Husband, how can you?" Rui shook her head repeatedly. Li picked her up and put her on the bed. He said, "It's natural for a husband to wash your wife's feet. Why can't you do that?" "Come on, sit down. The water was just right." Li slowly took off her shoes and sock and soaked her feet in the wooden tub. Her feet were delicate and as white as jade. Her toes were neatly arranged like round pearls. Li reached out to hold them and could feel that her body was a little stiff. Although he had helped her wash her feet many times, it was the first time he did something like this. She couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Li didn't show any abnormality. He lowered his head and was patient and careful. The woman in front of him was his wife. She was the closest person to him in this world. Compared to what she had done for him, this was really nothing. At first, he thought that he had always been honest in his previous life. He didn't do anything evil. But the heavens sent him to a place like this. He had no family, no friends, and nothing familiar. Was it too much? After experiencing so many things, that thought had long since been annihilated without a trace. This was not a punishment but a gift. Many images appeared in his mind. In the end, there were still many people here who loved him and were worthy of his love. For example, this quiet woman in front of him. She was his wife, a small life that belonged to them and was about to descend into this world. Rui was perfect. Her appearance was unparalleled, and her martial arts skills were unparalleled. She was always so quiet and tranquil. She never had any temper tantrums. She would silently guard behind you and only appear when you needed her. She satisfied all the fantasies a man had about his other half. At this time she sat quietly on the bed and he washed her feet. After a while, they were able to sleep in each other's arms. Li felt that his luck was really damn good. "I, Lu Rui, it should be from that night in Willow Leaf Village." The moment the vague figure standing outside the door said this, his good luck began. Lowering her head to look at his serious expression, her body gradually relaxed. She placed one hand on her lower abdomen and used the other to help him tame a strand of his hair. The corner of her mouth revealed a smile that could charm all living things. "Thank you, my husband." Li raised his head and said, "Just a word of thanks." "It's not sincere." A pair of soft arms wrapped around his neck. While Li was still in a daze, he felt a cold sensation on his lips. "How about this?" She rarely took the initiative. Her pretty face was like a blooming flower. Not long after, Li sat by the stone table in the courtyard and looked at the ridiculously round moon in the sky. The night was long and he couldn't sleep. Chapter 752. Li lay on the rocking chair. The servant girl placed 2 peeled eggs in front of his eyes and rolled them gently. Yesterday he only felt a little sleepy after sitting in the courtyard until late at night. Li felt that it was time to consider the matter of Rui and sleeping in separate rooms. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to sleep in the future. "Young master, are we going to move soon?" The servant girl put down the eggs and moved her little hand on his head. Her voice was soft. Li nodded. "Yes, pack your things for the next 2 days. We'll be moving to the city soon." The servant girl nodded obediently. For her, as long as she could be with the young master and miss, it didn't matter where they moved. Creak. The door of Mississippi Lou's room opened. She walked out of the room. Xuanhuan looked down at the young master with dark circles under his eyes and then looked at her. She picked up the 2 boiled eggs and shook them. "Second miss, do you want eggs?" Yang Liuqing was probably the outsider that Mississippi Lou treated the most carefully. In fact, ever since she became Rui's disciple, Li had never treated her as an outsider. She left without saying goodbye. Even he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, let alone Mississippi Lou. He still wanted to figure out the ins and outs of this matter. "Yang Liuqing, the little disciple of your second miss?" Emingzu ate the shrimp fried rice that Li brought over and looked up at him. "What about her? Help me check if there is anyone with the same name as her among the royal family or nobles of the Wu kingdom." Li said and then opened his mouth. The arrogant Lolita put a peeled shrimp into his mouth. This was not the era of the developed internet in the future. It was easy to search for the needed information on the internet. It would be more troublesome for Li to do this on his own. The royal family always had some special channels. Of course, these weren't things that Li could easily come into contact with. Emingzu nodded and looked at the white-haired old woman beside her. "Nanny, please make a trip." The old woman nodded and looked at Li meaningfully. Then she turned and left. The arrogant Lolita peeled another shrimp for Li. Then she hugged his arm and said coquettishly, "Sir, can you take us out of the palace today?" She was already 13 years old, almost 14 years old, and her body had begun to develop. Naturally, she had to pay more attention to her behavior. Concubine Yen had always been strict with her etiquette education, but when she saw Li Yi, she revealed her playful nature and no longer had any royal manners. Seeing that Li Yi was unmoved, she hurriedly winked at Yongning, who was chewing on the pork ribs. Although Yongning was young, she had always been Xianning's little follower. She could understand her meaning with one look. She put down the pork ribs and hugged Li Yi's other arm. She blinked her big watery eyes and looked at him pitifully. Who could resist these two pairs of extremely cute and innocent big eyes? Li Yi sighed slightly and nodded helplessly. Sir is the best. The Tsundra Lolita jumped up and kissed him on the cheek. When there were no outsiders around, she would return to this little girl's temperament. Yongning also came over. Her mouth was still stained with oil. She blushed and kissed the other side of Li Yi's face. Although she was much younger than the arrogant Lolita, she was quieter because of her experience and was far less playful. Yongning, hurry up. Let's go change. The arrogant Lolita pulled Yongning and ran out of the morning dew hall. A group of palace maids followed behind in a panic and shouted, "Your Highness, slow down." Concubine Liang had passed away early. Yongning was still young and would be afraid to live alone in the palace. Li Yi suggested to the old emperor to let her live with the arrogant Lolita and be taught by concubine Yen. Although Xianning was playful, she still took good care of this little sister. Emingzi put down the bowl and looked at him. She asked, "Did you see father today?" "No." Li Yi shook his head. He came today mainly to ask her about Yangliuking. He also wanted to see Yongning and the arrogant Lolita. He did not see the old emperor. Emingzi suddenly looked at him and hid the trace of hope in her eyes. She asked, "Is there really no way to cure father's body?" In her heart, he was still the omnipotent Li Yi who could solve anything. Li Yi paused while peeling the prawns. The atmosphere became a little stifling. Even in the future, the old emperor's illness was incurable. He had tried his best to change it, but he could only slow down or slightly extend his life. He was not a god and there was nothing he could do. Li Yi sighed and said, "If I can move out of the palace and put aside all political affairs to recuperate, the situation might be much better." Although it was impossible to cure this illness completely, it would not kill him immediately. It was important to maintain a good mood. The palace was like a huge cage. It was too oppressive and lacked people. Even though most of the political affairs were handed over to the two prime ministers, the country was too big. As the emperor, there were too many things he had to deal with every day. When Li Yi talked to him, he would often ignore his identity as the emperor. Occasionally he would joke around as a form of adjustment. This was the tacit understanding they had developed over a long period of time. However, the effect was only temporary. If the old emperor could immediately put down the burden on his shoulders and find a quiet place outside the capital with beautiful mountains and rivers, he could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun when he had nothing to do. If he was in the mood, he could go to the brothels to play mahjong with Chang or find a few old ladies to dance in the square. He could not say that he would live to a ripe old age, but he could definitely live for a few more years. However, Li Yi could not mention this method, and neither could the imperial physician. Even they knew it very well. "Father, he is very tired." Emingzi lowered her head. Her face was a little gloomy, but then she raised her head and said seriously, "I will try to persuade father." Li Yi nodded. She was probably the only one who could raise such matters with the old emperor. There was a short silence between the two of them. Then the sound of footsteps approached from afar. The white-haired old woman came over with a thick stack of books in her arms. She put them on the table. "These are all the information about the Wu Kingdom." Emingzi looked at Li Yi and said, "Take these books back and read them slowly. Remember to return them when you are done. It won't take much effort to find someone." Li Yi shook his head. Since these books were not for the public, it was better to leave them here to avoid bringing her unnecessary trouble. He picked up a book and casually flipped through the pages. He was so fast that the old woman standing to the side could not see clearly. In the time it took to take 2 breaths, he picked up another book and repeated what he did just now. Emingzi had already seen his reading speed, so she was no longer surprised. "What are you doing?" The white-haired old woman looked at him with a face full of confusion. Li Yi casually replied, "Reading? You can memorize it like this?" The old woman was puzzled. At this speed, she could not even see the words on the pages clearly. "I'm just looking for something. There is no need to memorize it." Li Yi could not tell her that even the action of flipping the pages was unnecessary. As long as he touched these books, he would remember all the content in the book. Wouldn't he be regarded as a monster? The white-haired old woman looked at him as if she was looking at a monster. After he flipped through several books, the sound of flipping pages finally stopped. Li Yi's eyes stopped on a certain page. Found it. He looked at some information recorded on it and his eyes slightly narrowed. Chapter 753. Have a look. Li Yi put a few pieces of paper on the table in front of Mississippi Lu. He had just copied them from the palace. Most of them were secrets of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, in this era where information was blocked, secrets for the people of the Jing Kingdom were not secrets in the Wu Kingdom. Several years ago, the current emperor of the Wu Kingdom, who was only the second prince at that time, killed his father and took the throne as he wished. After he took the throne, the first thing he did was, of course, to eliminate the remaining supporters who were loyal to the late emperor and would rather die than submit. Then he killed his elder brother, the eldest legitimate son of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom and Empress Wendy, who was also the crown prince of the Wu Kingdom at that time, with a cup of poisoned wine. This was a normal action. No emperor would leave alive a person who could threaten his position. And there was more than one person who could threaten him. The emperor of the Wu Kingdom and Empress Wendy had 2 sons and a daughter. As the eldest son, the former crown prince was killed. Princess Duanrong, who was only 14 years old, and the young prince disappeared without any news. Some people said that they were secretly executed by the emperor of the Wu Kingdom after the usurpation. Some people also said that they were hidden by the ministers who were loyal to the late emperor, waiting for the day when they could set things right and help the young prince to regain the throne. Some people also said that they were imprisoned in the Deep Palace. In short, whether in the Wu Kingdom or in other countries, there were many speculations about this matter. But obviously, none of the speculations was confirmed. From the information collected in the palace, Li Yi learned that the daughter of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom and the queen was titled Princess Duanrong, and her name was Yangliuking. At that time, Li Yi finally understood what the unsmiling girl who was unbelievably strict with him was carrying on her back then. Did she want to go back to take revenge after learning martial arts? The possibility was so small that it was almost negligible. How could the security around the emperor of a country be weak? Even a grandmaster would not be able to easily sneak into the palace to commit regicide. Moreover, her strength was still a long way from that of a grandmaster. The possibility of her taking revenge on her own was too small. Of course, the current her was no longer the rash young girl from 2 years ago. She would definitely not do something like striking a rock with an egg. He had already asked the eldest princess to pay more attention to the whereabouts of that Princess Duanrong of the Wu Kingdom. The Jing Kingdom definitely had people who specialized in collecting such information in the Wu Kingdom. I've already asked someone to keep an eye on her. Li Yi saw that Mississippi. Lu was silent, so he asked with concern, "Are you all right?" His disciple, who left without saying goodbye, was actually a princess of a country, and could be considered as half a princess of a subjugated country. Li Yi could not understand Mississippi Lu's feelings at the moment. Although she was usually strict on the surface, they were about the same age, and their temperaments were like carved from the same mold. The relationship between master and disciple in this era was far from what the future generations could understand. Mississippi Lu never did things without a beginning, so Li Yi was really worried that she would run away without a word one day. "It's okay." Mississippi Lu put away the pieces of paper, stood up and said, "I see. Are you really fine?" Li Yi looked at her. Why did she have to pull a long face? At this time he forgot that Mississippi Lu always had a straight face. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "What do you think will happen?" Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, "Just smile when it's okay. It's not good to always have a cold face. Boring?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him indifferently and walked straight in front of him. When she walked past Li Yi reached out and tugged at her cheeks. It was still the same bouncy face that he was familiar with. No matter what expression she put on, the corners of her lips still curled up. She stood there in a daze, as if she did not expect that he would dare to do such a bold thing in this place that was no longer the kingdom of Qi. "Damn it, why is the sunlight so dazzling recently? I can't see again." Fang closed his eyes and touched his hands randomly. He actually found the position of the door accurately, and his figure disappeared in an instant. Those people have even begun to imitate the style of our ready-made clothes now. They use inferior cloth, rough production, and the price is low. Our business has been affected, but they are backed by those big families and we can't afford to offend them. It's better not to cause more trouble. Tseng Zumo said a few words and looked at Li Yi sitting on the chair with an abnormal expression. She asked in confusion, "What's wrong with you?" "It's nothing. I'm a little tired sitting down. Let's talk on my stomach." Li Yi stood up with the help of the chair and lay on the small bed next to him. His butt was not touching the chair and he immediately felt much more comfortable. More importantly, there was a faint fragrance on the small bed, which reminded him of the not very warm hug that day. It was the same smell. When have we ever been afraid of trouble? After changing to a comfortable position, Li Yi looked at her and said, "It's just the Cui family. In this capital city, there is no one we can't offend except the emperor. Don't worry, the Cui family won't be able to jump around for long. Get up." Tsingzumo forgot about the business at this time and walked over with a little blush. How could a woman's bed be casually slept by others? Although this was only a studio, she would usually rest here when she was tired from painting. She slept here more often than in her bed in her room. If others saw this, they might think of her. Of course, this others only referred to someone who would tease her because of this. Seeing that Tsingzumo had already grabbed his arm and pulled him off the bed, Li quickly said, "Isn't it just lying down for a while? Don't be so stingy." He couldn't sit down now. Yesterday he pinched Mississippi Lou's face, and she chased after him until his butt was swollen. He suspected that she was using him to vent her anger. She didn't touch anywhere and only kicked his butt. Although it wasn't hurt, it would at least hurt for a day or two. This grudge had been formed and he remembered it in his heart. In the future he would return it 10 times or even 100 times. "Get off." Seeing him being so shameless, Tsingzumo was a little angry. She couldn't help but think of the 2 times he saw her naked body, but she pretended that nothing had happened. He was also shameless. He even said to Cindy that he wanted to marry her, but now, in short, after being stimulated by him at this moment, the Luo Shui goddess had mixed feelings in her heart. There was an indescribable feeling. Naturally, she couldn't move Li Yi with her strength, so she simply took off her embroidered shoes, jumped onto the bed and wanted to push him off. In a moment of desperation, she pushed the wrong position, and one hand pressed on Li Yi's butt. Ouch! A sharp pain came. Li Yi's body straightened, and the expression on his face twitched. He grabbed Tsingzumo's wrist and gritted his teeth. Don't touch there." Her wrist was grasped by a strong hand. After a moment of daze, Tsingzumo's face quickly turned red. She seemed to have discovered something and asked, "Why?" Li gritted his teeth. "I accidentally hurt myself yesterday." One of Tsingzumo's hands was held by him. She looked at him, then looked down and suddenly pressed her other hand on his butt. At this moment she even forgot about the boundaries between men and women. She only thought that this shameless man had always bullied her, and now she finally had a chance to get back at him. Li Yi's eyes widened. The pain this time was even more intense than before. His hand loosened and she easily broke free. Seeing him like this, Tsingzumo's pretty face revealed a hint of smugness. "You have this day too," she thought with such pleasure in her heart. "Are you going to get down or not?" She raised a hand and pretended to hit him. Li Yi's eyelids twitched. He subconsciously held her hand and turned over. However, he didn't expect that Tsingzumo would be driven by this force and fall straight down, pressing on top of him. As a result, Li Yi's butt came into intimate contact with the bed, and because there was another person on top of him, it was even closer. At this moment he felt that he had come to hell. However, the next moment all the pain seemed to disappear, and he felt as if he had gone from hell to heaven in an instant. Her soft body pressed against his, but their lips didn't touch, but their faces were indeed close together. An even clearer fragrance came to his face. Li Yi could feel her breathing and heartbeat. When he opened his eyes he saw a pink and white jade neck. The reason why it was pink and white was because this skin was turning from white to pink. The whole world seemed to quiet down at this moment. At the door of the studio, the little servant girl with her hair combed into a bun put her thumb in her mouth and quietly moved a little to the side. Then she opened her eyes wide. Chapter 754. Li Yi was no longer unfamiliar with this delicate body on top of him. Although there were 2 beautiful accidents, they were only visual impacts. This kind of skin tightly pressed together, and he could feel her rapid heartbeat. It was far more exciting than a hug that was not exactly warm. With the soft body in his arms and so close to her, Li Yi's expression was a bit dazed. He seemed to instinctively hold her slender waist. Summer clothes were thin to begin with. She was wearing a thin dress at the moment. Even through the clothes she could still feel that kind of slippery feeling. Tsingzumo had struggled to prop herself up. Her face was full of shame and anger, as if she would explode in the next moment. However, at a certain moment, a strange feeling came from her waist, causing her body to tremble slightly. She lowered her head and looked at him in disbelief. His expression was a bit dazed and his eyes were a bit unfocused. She saw a certain emotion in the depths of his eyes, which made her heart beat faster. Something seemed to melt in her heart. At this moment she was half propping herself up. Their bodies were no longer close together, but in reality, there was only an extremely small distance. This kind of distance was actually even more ambiguous. Li only needed to shift his gaze slightly to see more scenery. However, he could not think about this at this moment. The dazed look in his eyes quickly dissipated, and he realized what situation he was in right now. He looked at her pretty face, which was inches away from him. Their breaths blew on each other's faces, and they just stared at each other in a daze. Li looked away. He was worried that he would not be able to recover from her almost natural seductive posture, and his hands quickly let go. Xianxia saw a certain emotion fade from his eyes. Her body stiffened slightly, and her face was no longer blushing. A trace of pain and disappointment appeared in the depths of her eyes, and she struggled to climb up from his body. Li only glanced at her tentatively. When he saw the light in her eyes fade, his heart almost uncontrollably tightened. Without any hesitation, his hand once again wrapped around her slender waist, and he exerted a little force. In the end, the goddess of Luo Shui didn't get up. She fell on his body even more heavily than before. This time, the two of them looked at each other's eyes and noses. They both saw the same thing in each other's eyes. They just stared at each other without saying a word. Only the sound of their heartbeats could be heard clearly in the quiet room. The servant girl, who had already put her thumbs in her mouth, finally seemed to realize something. She gently closed the door without making a sound. Then she pressed her ear against the door and held her breath. An excited expression appeared on her face. After a quarter of an hour, she still didn't hear any sound. Her feet were a little numb from standing. She held onto the door and pressed her ears even closer. The door was opened from the inside. Li Yi supported Xiao Chui's forehead to prevent her from falling. He stepped out of the room, pinched her face and said, "So young yet not learning good things." Watching him walk out, Xiao Chui rubbed her face. When she looked into the room, she saw the young miss coming down from the bed. Her clothes were neat and tidy, but her face was a little red. Other than that, there didn't seem to be anything strange. She grew up in a brothel and naturally knew much more than ordinary women. She knew that if something had happened between them just now, the young miss would definitely not be like this. She shook her head with some regret. These two really were strange people. Xianxia walked out of the room. Her face was still flushed like a peach blossom. She sat at the stone table in the courtyard and stared in a certain direction. Although they didn't say anything or do anything just now, the two of them hugged each other and stared at each other for a long time. Some things were different from before. These things didn't need to be said. Zheng Shichen walked in from outside and even looked back suspiciously. He had met that person here several times, and with some rumors in the outside world, he was almost certain of that possibility. He wanted to say something about this matter, but with the relationship between the two of them at this time, he couldn't. He stood by the table and opened an exquisite paper package. He looked at Zheng Zimo and said with a smile, "Zimo, Fuji released a new product 2 days ago. The taste is not bad, try it." Zheng Zimo looked up at him. Although she didn't speak, she poured a cup of tea from the table and moved the teacup to the opposite side. The expression on Zheng Shichen's face froze. He looked at her as if he couldn't believe it. His hand holding the teacup trembled slightly. He slowly sat down, suppressed the surprise in his heart, and drank the cup of tea in one gulp. The tea was cold, but the warmth in his heart even surpassed that of the day he was promoted to assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, and countless envious gazes in the court. The slovenly old man sat in the carriage and glanced at Li Yi. He asked, "Go back?" Li Yi nodded. The slovenly old man looked at him suspiciously and asked, "Didn't you come to see the house today? Haven't you seen it yet? Didn't you take a detour because of the traffic jam?" The slovenly old man looked at him as if he didn't know whether he had seen it or not. Li Yi waved his hand and got into the carriage. "Then let's go see it." What was it that made him so happy that he even forgot the serious matter of this trip? The slovenly old man looked back in a certain direction, and his heart was full of doubts. The house had almost been arranged and they could move in tomorrow. Li Yi had just packed some things he needed. As for the daily necessities and the like, there were maids to take care of them. Life in the future would not be so boring. In the morning or afternoon he could accompany Rui to take a walk by the lake of the Mathematics Institute, or he could walk more and go shopping. It was not far from the Imperial Palace, and the proud Lolita and Yongning could come over every day. Rui liked children and she also liked them to play at home. Li Yi did not know what it would be like at home after they gave birth to their children. Mississippi Lu's mood seemed to have improved again. Li Yi felt that the beating was not in vain, but he still had to remember it. A gentleman's revenge was never too late. One day she would definitely regret it. Everything had been going well recently. It seemed that all his bad luck had been used up when he was kidnapped by the Taoist nun. He could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun peacefully. He did not have to think about anything, and he could not help but want to smile when he thought about it. The little maid's hands were soft, and it was comfortable wherever he pressed. Recently, the sunlight in this courtyard had been particularly dazzling, so when Fang came in, he had to be careful. He did not want to see something that he should not see, and he did not have to worry too much about the problem of loyalty and justice. Young master, the Chui family is really going to hold a glass appreciation meeting. They invited a lot of people, and it will be held in half a month. The Chui family must have invited a lot of people since they delayed the meeting so much, and it would not be limited to the capital. They were really making a big move. Others did not know how many pieces of glass the Chui family had accumulated, but Li Yi was very clear about what each piece of glass was. He knew it even better than the Chui family themselves. They dared to mess up their business. Although it was not a big impact, it was really disgusting. When it came to disgusting people, he had never been afraid of anyone. After thinking about it, he waved at Fang. "Come here, there are some things that need to be arranged." Chapter 755. Although not everyone knew that the Chui family would hold a glass appreciation party in half a month, all the influential people in the capital received an invitation. Although the venue was not as high class as the Wang family's, it was said that the scale was much larger. The number of glasswares would be several times that of the Wang family's. It was strange that such a precious object as glass was rarely seen. Why did it suddenly increase these days? Many people were puzzled. The royal family once held a glass appreciation party, and there were many glass Buddha statues and wares on display. This was not strange. It was not strange for the royal family to take out any treasures. A few months ago, the Wang clan also held a glaze bazaar and took out even more glaze. This was not strange. The Wang clan was rich enough to rival a country, and they coincidentally met a foreign merchant, so they obtained so many glaze wares. It was nothing special. But why did the Chui family join in the fun this time? According to their bold words, it seemed that the glass they had accumulated was more than the Wang family took out at the last glass bazaar. Everything had a limit. The reason why glass was precious was because it was rare. Only a fool would spend so much money to buy a glass appreciation party that was held every few days. Of course, the number of glass on the market was far from overflowing. Even if the price was really reduced, the Chui family still made a lot of money this time. The Chui family was proud of their success, but the merchants in the same jewelry business in the capital were having a hard time. The wind of glass in the capital had been blowing for several months, and there was no sign of it stopping. The actions of these big families were getting bigger and bigger. If this continued, it would be difficult for them to do business. Everyone was scrambling for glass, but it was expensive. With their wealth and status, it was difficult to get it. Running a small business could not be compared to the Chui family's golden jade pavilion. They could only hope that the heavens would quickly take back the gift of glass and give them a way out. The shopkeeper of a jewelry shop in the capital was sitting in the shop and sighing. From morning until now, there was not a single customer in the shop. This business was really impossible. While he was lamenting in his heart, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. The shopkeeper jumped in fright. When he looked up, he saw a tall and sturdy man walking in from outside. "Sir, are you looking at jewelry? Are you giving it to someone or?" The shopkeeper hurriedly went up to greet him. This was the first customer of the day, so he had to treat him well. In a place like this, sometimes they wouldn't be able to open for business for a few months after completing a single business. "I don't look at jewelry." The man's voice rang out like a great bell. "I'm here to sell you something." Selling things? When the shopkeeper heard this, he immediately lost interest. He waved his hand and said, "We sell jewelry here, we don't buy things." The burly man took out a sparkling and translucent glass ball from his sleeve. The shopkeeper swallowed the second half of his words. His eyes widened and his breathing became hurried as he stared at him. "I have a batch of colored glaze to sell to you." The burly man looked at him and said, "Look at this color, this luster, this feeling. It's definitely a top-notch colored glass." The shopkeeper stared at the glass ball in his hand. Even his breathing stopped for a moment. If such an item was placed in his shop, it would undoubtedly become the treasure of the shop. He didn't know how many customers it would attract. He did not have the right to attend the colored glaze appraisal conference in the palace, nor did he receive an invitation to the Wang family's colored glaze bazaar. This time, no matter what price he had to pay, he would leave behind this glass ball. Seeing that the shopkeeper did not speak, the man thought that the shopkeeper did not believe him. Frowning, he suddenly raised his hand and threw the glass ball to the ground. After an extremely crisp sound, The burly man crouched down and pointed at the pile of fragments on the ground. Look, these cracks, these fragments, they're not fake, right? He picked up a piece and handed it to the shopkeeper. If you don't believe me, feel it. The shopkeeper's lips trembled and his face had already turned purple. He pointed at the burly man and said in a trembling voice, You. The burly man patted his shoulder and said, Don't rush, don't rush. If you don't believe me, I'll let you throw one yourself. Bring it in. He waved his hand and two people outside the door carried in a large box. After opening it, the shopkeeper's gaze was completely attracted by the dazzling array of items in the box. The burly man looked at him and said with a smile, How about it? Today we happen to be having an activity. Each item is 10 taels. 10 taels of silver, you won't lose out. 10 taels of silver, you won't be fooled. 10 taels of silver, you can buy a piece of colored glaze. How about it? Are you tempted? Action is better than action. If you buy 10 pieces at once, you won't have to pay for the broken one. 10 taels of silver for one piece? The shopkeeper raised his head and looked at him, his eyes flashing. What, you think it's expensive? The burly man looked at him and said with a smile, If you buy more, the price can be negotiated. She was the steward of the Chui family's golden jade pavilion in the capital and the neighboring prefectures. Originally he was only an unimportant member of the Chui family, but soon he was no longer. If all these colored glaze were sold, the Chui family could make a huge profit from it. And this was all because of his foresight a few months ago. The last colored glaze charity sale of the Wang family did not satisfy everyone. Instead, it made the love of colored glaze popular in the capital. The colored glaze bought from the Wang family could be sold at a high price with a slight change of hands. And the Chui family hoarded the colored glaze from the foreign merchants. When the public's desire for the colored glaze reached its peak, they took the opportunity to sell it. Then they waited to count the silver. After this incident, he would definitely be valued by the family and become a core member of the family. It was unlikely that he would be able to develop in the imperial court in this lifetime. But if he was only in charge of the Chui family's business, it was very possible. The invitations had been sent out. Only 10 days later, the Chui family's colored glaze appraisal would begin. That moment would be the new peak of his life. Everything was ready except for the east wind. She looked at a young man coming from afar and asked, Dongfeng, what's the matter? Why are you so flustered? Third uncle, it's over, it's over. Chui Dongfeng's face was pale and his voice was full of fear. What's the panic, what's the panic? She looked at him discontentedly and said, What the hell happened? Is the sky falling down? Colored glaze, colored glaze. Chui Dongfeng gasped. What happened to the colored glaze? She's face changed and asked, Could it be that something happened to the Chui family's colored glaze? The word colored glaze was related to his future. She's heart immediately tightened. The Chui family's colored glaze is fine. Hearing Chui Dongfeng's first sentence, She's heart was relieved. As long as the colored glaze was fine, everything was fine. But there are colored glaze everywhere in the capital now. Chui Dongfeng's voice was still trembling. You can buy a piece of colored glaze with 10 taels of silver and get a piece of soap. If you buy clothes, you get a colored glaze hairpin. If you buy perfume, you get a colored glaze bracelet. The Drunken Moon Brothel. The chopsticks in the Drunken Moon Brothel have been replaced with colored glaze. Shi's body softened and he grabbed Chui Dongfeng's arm. His eyes immediately became bloodshot and he asked in a trembling voice, You say it again. Chui Dongfeng's eyes were already full of despair. These days, a large amount of colored glaze suddenly appeared in the capital. Colored glaze is no longer valuable. When the Chui family was about to hold a colored glaze appreciation party and wait to make a big profit, the originally hard-to-buy colored glaze suddenly became a common thing on the street overnight. Who would spend a lot of money to buy the Chui family's colored glaze? But the problem was that the price paid by the Chui family for these colored glaze was too great. Shi knelt on the ground, his vision turned black and there was only one thought in his mind. It's over. Not far away there was already a noisy sound of footsteps coming. Li Yi still overestimated the patience of the Chui family. In just half a year the price of colored glaze fell from the clouds to the ground. If it continued for a few more days, there would still be a big profit to be made. However, he also knew that this matter should end here. This kind of money could not be earned too much. If it continued, the fragile economic system of the Jing kingdom might be at risk of collapse. The old emperor would be angry with him. While thinking about these things, Wang Yong hurriedly walked in from the outside. As soon as he entered the door, he asked with a face full of joy, Brother Li, have you heard the Chui family? Li nodded, sighed and said, The Chui family. This time the Chui family, I'm afraid, will lose millions of taels of silver. Chapter 756. Of course the Chui family was going to lose money. Their brains were damaged. Using a large amount of jewelry and silver to exchange for a bunch of worthless junk, if they didn't lose out, who would? However, everyone knew that this couldn't be blamed on the Chui family. After all, since ancient times, colored glass had been an extremely precious treasure. This was not only reflected in its value, but also its significance. Crystal clear and radiant, it was already very attractive. It was also a Buddhist treasure, symbolizing good fortune. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see it in their lifetime. Who would have thought that such a good treasure would become cabbages on the side of the road overnight? Previously it was worth 3,000 taels of silver, but now it could only be used as a token to buy clothes. Buy one and get two free. The difference was like heaven and earth. No matter how smart one was, they wouldn't have thought of it. No wonder the Chui family suffered a loss. The rarer something was, the more expensive it was. It was all because in such a short period of time, too much colored glass had appeared in the capital, and the price of colored glass was dropping by the day. The crystal was clear and colorful, and it was beautiful, but that kind of crystal clear and colorful thing was everywhere in the capital, so who would want it? This time, the nobles in the capital were all dumbfounded. A few months ago they spent thousands of taels of silver to buy the colored glass wares. In the blink of an eye it was worthless. No one would feel good about this. This time they were screwed over by the Wang family. The monks were equally dumbfounded. Other people's colored glass wares were at most 1,000 taels of silver, but their colored Buddha statues were worth no less than 10,000 taels of silver. There were countless people who secretly complained about the royal family and the Wang family, but they didn't dare to show it on the surface. After all, among the two families either one was extremely powerful. Even the nobles couldn't afford to offend them. However, when they heard that the head of the Wang family smashed hundreds of colored glass wares in front of everyone, the complaints in their hearts lessened and turned into mockery and schadenfreude. The Wang family actually still had so many colored glass wares. They must be thinking of making a few more windfalls in the future. Otherwise, why would they hold the colored glass appreciation convention? Now that colored glass was worthless. Although they suffered a loss compared to the Wang family's loss, it was simply a drop in the bucket. People were always like this. When they were unlucky, they couldn't help but feel better when they knew that others were even more unlucky than them. Of course, it was not all a loss for them. The colored glaze that the royal family and the Wang family sold to them were all donations. Everyone was registered, and a large portion of it went to the national treasury. At least, it left a record with the emperor, which could prove that they had done their best for the country. The silver was not all for naught. The Chui family was different. According to the calculations of some people, the Chui family's loss this time was at least 4 million taels of silver. What kind of concept was 4 million taels of silver? It was almost a third of the Jing kingdom's annual tax revenue. No matter how deep the Chui clan's resources were, this number was still a heavy blow to them. It was so heavy that it hurt their bones and shook their foundation. Without many years of recuperation, it would be impossible for them to recover. At this moment, everyone understood what was going on. The Wang family, the Chui family, the big and small dignitaries in the capital, and even the royal family were all fooled by those foreign merchants. Ever since lioli became a common commodity, those foreign merchants disappeared without a trace. They suddenly appeared and then disappeared, taking away a large amount of silver. They completely ignored some people in the capital, and for a long time they could only tighten their belts and live their lives. Damn foreign merchants. So much so that this sentence became a classic that people in the capital often said. Where those foreign merchants went even after many years was still an unsolved mystery. I want a house to bring me here. We agreed that my house will be opposite yours. Yi Zichen said. I have to go back, bring Shaolian, to get married. Looking at the laughing figures in front of him, Li waved his hand and said, You can ask Mr. Lu for these things, he will arrange it for you. As long as they earned enough points, they would be able to exchange for what they needed. Be it silver, houses, or even pointers from top experts, they were all clearly marked. This was the rule of the Lu alliance. From the beginning, Li Yi did not intend to tie them down with friendship or anything else. Tangible benefits were the strongest ties to maintain a relationship. Of course, everything would not be so unreasonable. Mississippi Lu didn't know these things, but Lu Luo knew how to win people's hearts. Before they left, Li Yi reminded them worriedly, Remember, don't talk to people like this when you go out or you will be beaten to death. Remember to tell them. Now in the capital, foreign merchants were hated by everyone. If they were discovered, it would not be as simple as a beating. "I'm sorry, I'm used to it." A man touched his head awkwardly and left with the others. They didn't need to report to Li Yi about the matter of Lioli, but these people were different. They were the ones in charge of contacting the Qi Kingdom. The news of Lioli's worthless value would soon reach the Qi Kingdom, and they needed to go there to make some arrangements. "Young master, isn't it too much to earn so much money?" Fang scratched his head and couldn't force out a complete sentence. 2 years ago he was still risking his life for a few copper coins. How long had it been? The amount of money he had passed through was already in the millions. When he thought about it, there was always a feeling of unease in his heart. "It is a little too much." Li nodded. Although this method of earning money was fast, it seemed to be similar to cheating and swindling people. If one cheated too many people, they would suffer retribution. However, the old emperor was personally involved in this matter. Without his approval, there wouldn't be a Lioli Bazaar. Even if there was retribution, the reputation of the royal family and the Wang family was much greater than that of the Li family. "The soup is ready. I'll go take a look." Li walked towards the kitchen and waved at him. "Go ahead. When you pass by Willow Lane, help me get some osmanthus cakes." They were now in the new residence in the capital. This place was not far from the School of Mathematics and the Imperial Palace. The environment was quiet and secluded, and it was some distance away from the noisy market. There was a slope behind the house. The slope was not steep, but standing at the top of the slope, one could overlook the surrounding scenery. The most eye-catching thing was the artificial lake of the School of Mathematics and Mathematics. At dusk, it would feel good to hold Rui's hand and take a walk there. What he had to do every day was to wake up early. Before the morning market dispersed, he would cross a few streets to buy some fresh vegetables. Sometimes, he would carry a fresh fish and stop at Willow Lane to rest for a while. When the sun rose to 45 degrees Celsius, he would return home to prepare dinner. He didn't need to do any of the procedures. At most, a maidservant would help him pick the vegetables and light the fire. At this time, Yongning would bring a small stool and sit down to watch. The Tsundra Lolita wanted to help but was always a nuisance. This kind of life was good enough. Li scooped a bowl of soup and tasted it. The taste wasn't too strong. He decided to let it boil for a while longer. He only drank a mouthful of soup, but he didn't want to waste it. He placed it on the stone table outside and walked to the back to call Xuanhuan to drink it. The soup was for Rui to keep her body healthy, but it was also good for ordinary women. It could beautify their skin, enhance their breasts, and stimulate their breasts. Little maidservants should drink more of it. This was the secret recipe of the old monk Tanin. It was said that it was for keeping her body healthy. Li found a similar recipe in a book, but it had a few more effects. Xuanhuan couldn't be found. She might have gone somewhere with the Tsundra Lolita. When Li returned, he saw someone sitting at the stone table. The bowl of soup had already been emptied. "This soup tastes good. It took a long time. It's good for the body." Li looked at the middle-aged man sitting there and smiled. "Drink more if you like it." Chapter 757. This was the second time that Li saw the old emperor leave the palace. He was still the same as when he was in Ningguang Fu, wearing an ordinary robe. His face was gentle and he looked like an uncle next door. No one knew that the person in front of them was the most powerful uncle in the entire Jing kingdom. The old emperor's illness was special. It was very dangerous when it acted up, so dangerous that there was a possibility that he would die every time. But normally, if one paid attention, there was no difference between him and a normal person. He did not come alone. The eldest princess was standing next to him, wearing a slim dress. He did not know if it was because of the dress or if her figure had become better, but her figure seemed to be more exquisite than a few days ago. Moving here was for the sake of peace and quiet. There were not many servants in the residence, but even if they met, they would not dare to stop them. So the old emperor had the opportunity to drink the soup that she prepared to trick Xuanhuan to drink. Changde came out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of soup. Li glared at him. This old guy really did not treat himself as an outsider. Fortunately, he had his own thoughts and even made a portion for Xuanhuan and Rui. Otherwise there would not be much left for Rui. Jing Emperor picked up another bowl, and Changde handed the other bowl to the eldest princess. When they came over, they saw Li put down the soup and went to the back. Jing Emperor drank a few mouthfuls before asking, "Did you make this soup?" He knew that Li had good cooking skills. Because Shanning often talked about it in his ears, he had the chance to taste it today. He was surprised by his cooking skills. It was probably not much different from the imperial chefs in the palace. Changde looked at Li and asked, "This soup, is it suitable for your majesty's body to drink more?" Li had once told him about his majesty's illness. There were many things that needed to be avoided on a daily basis, and diet was an important part. He was worried that Li Yi would forget, so he asked about it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's okay. This soup is very nourishing. It's okay to drink a few more bowls." This soup was good for women and there was no harm for men to drink it. It was just a supplement. The Princess Royal had a good figure, but it was only good. Compared to Mississippi Lou, the parts that should be curvy were curvy, but the parts that should be curvy were not curvy enough. She should drink more. Placate the miscarriage and stimulate the breast milk? The spoon that Jingdi had picked up stopped in the air, and the soup spilled on his lapel. Cough, cough. Emingzu put down the bowl. She seemed to have choked and her face was already red. She glared at Li Yi and hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe her mouth. Li Yi had never seen her act like a little girl. In fact, he had always regarded the swift and decisive princess as a man. Jingdi put down the spoon, obviously not intending to drink anymore. Emingzu also put down the bowl and secretly looked at Li Yi with a hint of anger. "Your Majesty, why are you?" Li Yi changed the topic at the right time. Jingdi looked at him and asked, "Why? You, the dean of the academy, is allowed to be lazy at home, but we cannot go out of the palace to relax?" Li Yi quickly said, "Steal half a day of leisure. The palace is like a cage. Your Majesty often goes out to relax. It is also good for your illness." Emingzu glanced at him. He was the only one who dared to say that the palace was a cage in front of her imperial father. Steal half a day of leisure? Jingdi looked at him and said with a tone of dissatisfaction, "We think you are stealing half a day of leisure, right?" Jealousy. It was obvious that he was jealous. He obviously saw that he was living a comfortable life and deliberately came to find trouble. Li Yi was too lazy to pay attention to him and stood aside without saying anything. Jingdi looked left and right and asked, "Where are Yongning and Shanning?" Li Yi pointed in a certain direction and said, "At the amusement park." He ordered people to build the amusement park. Several houses were connected and the ground was covered with soft mats. There were rocking cars, merry-go-rounds, slides, swings and other amusement facilities. It was also the favorite place of Yongning, Shanning and Duanwu. Although there were no exciting projects such as roller coasters and skydiving machines, in this era of extreme lack of entertainment, this was already considered super luxurious. "Take us to see." Jingdi seemed to be very interested in this place and stood up. Li Yi originally chose this place because he liked the environment here. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small park. There was running water in the garden, and the water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. Fish were playing in the water. Although the layout was not very luxurious, it was simple and did not lose its atmosphere. After passing through a bamboo forest path, their field of vision became open again. They could hear bursts of laughter coming from a row of houses. The arrogant Lolita was playing on a swing, and a palace maid was gently pushing it behind her. When she saw Li Yi coming in, she said loudly, Sir, you push me. They're not pushing high." Li Yi walked over, stopped the swing and carried her down from the swing. The arrogant Lolita pouted and was about to express her dissatisfaction. Suddenly, she opened her eyes wide and saw a figure coming in from outside the door. She ran over in surprise and said, "Father, why are you here?" Yongning also came over and stood quietly beside Jingdi. Jingdi touched their little heads and said, "If Father didn't come, my Shanning and Yongning would have almost forgotten Father." The arrogant Lolita twisted her body and said in a sweet voice, "Oh, how could Shanning forget Father?" Jingdi looked at the two little girls and a trace of sadness appeared on his face. He was their father, but he was also the emperor, the ruler of a country. Since they were young, he did not and could not fully fulfill the responsibilities of a father. It was no wonder that they always wanted to run out of the palace. The arrogant Lolita was full of joy for her father to leave the palace. She grabbed his arm and said, "Father, let's go outside to play. There are a lot of delicious food and fun things on the street. I will take Father to the brothel to watch the show." "It is wonderful." Jingdi pinched her little face and said with a smile, "Okay, Father will accompany you to have fun today." "Father is so good." The arrogant Lolita shook his arm and looked at Li Yi. She said, "As good as teacher." Li Yi felt that the arrogant Lolita thought that teacher was good because teacher would cook delicious food for her, play with her, and take her to watch interesting shows. Other children could get married at the age of 13. Because she grew up in the palace and was doted on by the emperor and two concubines, her temperament was similar to that of a child. The aged emperor was dragged by Shouning through the streets and alleys, sweeping through the crowd. Although there was only Changda following behind them, Li Yi could guarantee that if there was even the slightest movement from his side, within a breath's time, This place would be surrounded by 3 layers of people. Li Yi and the eldest princess were walking behind. He turned his head and looked at her. He asked, "How is the cooperation with the family of generals?" Li Emingzi said lightly, "It has just begun. The military provisions are very important. You have to visit the family of generals more often. How about the academy? Is everything okay?" "Everything is as usual. Although it is a female academy, we still have to pay attention to it. If there is nothing else, we should hold more parent-teacher meetings to let the parents understand the situation. It will also put them at ease." The arrogant Lolita was always short-lived. After pestering Jing Di for a while, she pulled Yong Ning along to play. Jing Di had a few palace guards follow them, and their footsteps finally slowed down. Li Emingzi looked at the smile on his face and thought for a moment. She said, "If there is nothing important, father might as well rest outside the palace for a few days." Li Yi was right. The palace looked glorious, but it was actually a cage. When she was in the palace, she had never seen her father show such a smile. Emperor Jing did not answer her. He looked at the group of children holding sugar-coated haws in their hands as they whizzed past the crowd. He shook his head and said, "When I was their age, I had already begun to study the scriptures. If I could let the children of poor families have books to read, the talents of the Jing kingdom would be inexhaustible in the future." Li Yi knew that the old emperor had wanted to break the situation where the court was almost controlled by the aristocratic families. From a long time ago, he had intentionally supported the students of poor families. However, due to various reasons, the results were very little. In this era, educational resources were very precious. They were often monopolized by the large clans with deep foundations. It was not easy for the poor to study. This directly led to the imperial court choosing officials from the aristocratic families. Only they had the ability to nurture outstanding disciples. However, this would cause the court to be filled with factions and complicated relationships. The court would be firmly controlled by the aristocratic families. This was not what a wise emperor wanted to see. For a wise emperor like the old emperor, what he was most concerned about was the poor people and the students of poor families. Li Yi crossed his arms and touched Mingzhu's shoulder. This was a rare opportunity. He had told her in detail how to support the children of poor families and break the monopoly of the aristocratic families in education. If he were to bring it up now, wouldn't he be saying it to the old emperor's heart? He had explained these routines clearly, and they only needed to follow the steps step by step. Emingzi glanced at him and thought that he was careless. She lowered her head and continued to think. Li Yi touched her again. Emingzi was still unmoved. Li Yi frowned and turned to look at her. This time he used a little more force. Emingzi finally turned to look at him. When she saw that he was staring at her, she seemed to have thought of something. She blushed and glared at him. Then she put some distance between them. This was a good opportunity to show off her talents in front of the old emperor. Li Yi wanted to talk to her about serious matters. What was with this blushing expression? What was this woman thinking about? Whether it was on the surface or in the dark, he had done enough for her. However, he couldn't always be the one to take the initiative, right? He was working himself to the bone, but she was enjoying herself up there. How could this be? She should at least take the initiative, right? Chapter 758. Hey, you have to move yourself. Ba, do you still remember the story I told you last time? Li Yi felt that he was facing a blockhead who could not understand anything. He looked at her and asked with a frown. Emingzi looked at him in confusion. What story? Li Yi reminded her. Wu. Mingzhu's heart skipped a beat. She subconsciously reached out to cover his mouth. She looked around and said, "Don't ever say such rebellious words again." Seeing that her father did not hear it, even if he heard the word Wu, he would not think of anything. This was a secret between the two of them. Only then did she feel slightly relieved. That matter could not be made known to outsiders, and even more so to his father. What are you thinking about all day? Li Yi pushed her hand away and looked at her unhappily. He said, "Open the imperial examination, put the poor in important positions, fill the court with gentlemen, and replace the aristocratic families. This is to share His Majesty's burden, not for you to imitate that woman. You didn't forget what I told you, did you?" Emingzi shook her head. She looked at him and nodded as if she understood. Her father had been putting the poor in important positions, replacing the aristocratic families, and letting the young scholars from poor families enter the center of the court. In the face of aristocratic politics, the poor had always been suppressed. After entering the court, they would be loyal to the royal family, which could effectively change the current situation in the court. Her father had done some things in response to this, including establishing a mathematics academy and recruiting a large number of commoners. However, she knew that there were more things that could be done to further expand the advantages of the commoners. In the end, it could turn into the kind of situation that Li Yi described, where the court was filled with noblemen and the rivers were clear. Because these things were related to the woman surnamed Wu. This was something she did not dare to think about normally. At this moment, with Li Yi's reminder, she understood that a method was a method after all. It worked in that fictional story and it could have the same effect in reality. A woman's mind was really hard to guess. Even if Li Yi never thought of the eldest princess as a woman, he still couldn't guess her thoughts. Fortunately, she finally understood his meaning. Li Yi took the tonghulu that the proud Lolita handed over. As he ate, he watched Princess Royal walk over and talk to Jing Emperor in a low voice. After eating 2 candied haws, he felt that something was wrong. Sour and sweet was what candied haws should taste like. The 2 candied haws he ate didn't taste sweet, only sour. When he looked down, it turned out that the sugar had already been licked clean. When he turned around, he saw that Sundra lowly covering her mouth and giggling at him. This little girl was becoming more and more impudent. After listening to Mingzhu's narration, Jing Emperor's eyebrows raised slightly. Then he shook his head and said, "Opening a large number of official schools can allow more poor students to study, but the cost is too great. It's so great that the imperial court cannot afford it." There were some methods that he had already decided on after weighing them in his heart. However, when it came to finances, he still had to hesitate. Although the national treasury had a lot of income in the past few days, it was not to the extent that it could be squandered wantonly. Wars, natural disasters. There were many places that needed money. It was not easy to maintain the balance and it could not be easily broken. Li Yi said solemnly, "No matter how poor we are, we can't be poor in education. No matter how bitter we are, we can't let our children suffer. They are the future of a country. They are related to the rise and fall of the country. They are like the sun in the morning, full of vigor and infinite potential. Now the Jing kingdom is ours, but the future of the Jing kingdom is still in their hands." Jing Emperor never despised the theory of governance that came from Li Yi's mouth. Moreover, these words were indeed what he was thinking. A large part of the reason why the imperial court was controlled by the aristocratic families was that they had a monopoly on education and books. It was too difficult for poor children to enter the imperial court without going through these aristocratic families. They could only rely on themselves. If all the children of poor families in the world could go to school and have books to read, this problem that had existed for thousands of years would be resolved in this dynasty. And this would be the first step for him to completely end the aristocratic politics. However, he did not have much time. It was still unknown whether he could completely eliminate some things in his lifetime. Jing Emperor shook his head and said, "I have also vigorously promoted the prefectural schools and the county schools. But you are not in the position to know how much it costs. A problem that can be solved with money is not a problem." Li Yi looked at Mingzhu and asked, "Your Highness, don't you think so?" The national treasury could not take out the extra money, but the Princess Royal could. It was useless for her to earn so much money. It was impossible for her to save all of it for her dowry. It would be better to build more Mingzhu Hope primary schools. At least, it would let the poor in the world remember her kindness. The plaque on the school should be custom-made and big, so that everyone would know that it was the Princess Royal who pitted them that they could study. What's more, she did not have to pay for this money. Li Yi had a plan in his heart. Maybe he could save more dowry for her so that they would not be friends in vain. Mingzhu looked at him in a daze. She did not know what Li Yi was thinking, but she was sure that he was thinking about something. Jing Emperor did not delve into this issue because the Tsundra Lolita had already pulled him to the brothel to watch the show. Mingzhu crossed her arms and looked at him. "What do you want to do?" "Eat the Emperor's salary and share the Emperor's worries." Li Yi did not go in. He leaned against the wall of the brothel and said, "Your Majesty has been supporting the poor. This is to solve the problem from the root." Mingzhu thought about it and blinked her eyes. "Do you have a salary?" Li Yi thought carefully for a moment and found that he really did not have a salary. He did not have much money and it was deducted because he got into trouble. The old emperor did not give him a salary at all. Then forget it. Li Yi waved his hand and was ready to go in to watch the show. He didn't even have a salary, so how could he worry about it? Whoever wanted to divide it, divide it. In the end, he did not step in and was grabbed by the eldest princess. Father's biggest headache is those big families that control the court. If we can help Father share this worry, I will ask Father to leave the palace to recuperate. Father should agree. Mingzhu looked at him and said in a soft voice, "Tell me, what should we do?" Li Yi looked at her and corrected her, It's you who will share it, not me. Mingzi shook her head. The same. She was her and he was himself. What did she mean by the same? It was a good conversation, but it suddenly became so ambiguous. It made the thin-skinned Li Yi blush. Li Yi looked at her. What should we do? Didn't you say it very clearly? Mingzi looked down. But the National Treasury doesn't have that much silver. Who said we need to use the National Treasury's silver? In their dreams. Li Yi pursed his lips. It was a rare opportunity. Of course, the fertile water would not flow into other people's fields. I don't have that much money. Mingzi shook her head. Then she seemed to have thought of something and looked at Li Yi. Li Yi quickly waved his hand. Don't look at me. My family's money doesn't grow on trees. It's not easy to earn money. He patted her shoulder out of habit and squinted his eyes. Don't worry. There will be silver. What should be, there will be. Seeing a certain light in his eyes, Li Mingzhu's heart suddenly relaxed and she became incomparably calm. Chapter 759. The opera being performed in the brothel was the classic, The Cowherd and the Weaver Maid. The Qiao festival was coming up in a few days, and this kind of opera was very popular. The brothel was not the busiest during the day, but there were many people inside. More than half of the seats were occupied. At night, the entire place would be filled with people. Everyone's attention was attracted by the wonderful performance on the stage. No one noticed that in a secluded corner at the back, a pretty girl was excitedly telling the story of the cowherd and the weaver maid to a middle-aged man behind her. Although the opera was wonderful, the story told by the man was even more wonderful. The middle-aged man sat there, patiently listening to the girl. In his arms was a young girl. Occasionally he would look at the stage with a satisfied smile on his face. A gray-robed old man stood behind him. His wrinkled face remained expressionless from start to finish. Outside the brothel, a young man and a young woman leaned against the wall and whispered to each other. When the time comes, there will be official schools in various places. They will be called Mingzhu Academy or Mingzhu Hope Academy. Students from poor families will be given a certain amount of subsidies, or they can do some chores in the academy or work part-time. The curriculum must be reasonable and they must be well-rounded. We don't want to cultivate a bunch of rotten scholars. I will write a detailed report for you when I get back and you can submit it to the emperor. Li Yi looked at her and reminded, remember, you are the only one who can do these things. As for how to get the money, I won't tell you until the matter is settled. The education reform in the Jing kingdom had already begun on a small scale. Li Yi was not worried that these changes would cause opposition. The old emperor already had the ability to judge. The old emperor had wanted to make a move against the aristocratic families for a long time, but the inside story was not that simple. Li Yi ate with him every day and he learned a lot from him in other aspects. The fact that the court was controlled by the aristocratic families had always been a thorn in the old emperor's heart. He wanted to use the children from poor families to cultivate officials who were absolutely loyal to the royal family to achieve his goal of centralizing power. Although the emperor had great power, he could not do whatever he wanted. He would be a fatuous emperor if he dismissed an official without a good reason, and he would not be able to convince the public. A family like the Cui family was far inferior to the imperial family in terms of military strength. However, it was impossible for the old emperor to send troops to destroy them just because he didn't like them. That was the behavior of bandits. The influence of the great clans was too great, especially to the officials who were attached to them. Touching them without a reason was tantamount to committing a crime. However, he couldn't just watch as these people stirred up trouble in the court and formed cliques for personal gain. The Cui family was a perfect example. Li Yi felt that the king of Shu, the eldest son of the royal family, was banished to that place because the old emperor couldn't stand the sight of the Cui family. The ones he had always wanted to deal with were the magnates led by the Cui family. Thinking about it, the Cui family had also committed a sin. They had just lost a few million taels of silver, and the coffin itself had probably been used up. Furthermore, the emperor was always thinking about them. What an unlucky year. After listening to him, Mingzhu nodded and suddenly asked, "Why does it have to be me?" Li Yi pursed his lips. This is a great contribution. Of course, we should not let the goodies flow to outsiders. So I'm not an outsider? We are the three heroes of the capital. We share blessings and misfortunes. Of course, we think of you first when there's something good. It's too distant to call us outsiders. At least we can be considered as half an insider, right? Mingzhu glared at him. Bah, who's your insider? It was obviously a very pure meaning, but she had to misunderstand. Li Yi couldn't be bothered to explain. He only felt that the princess was not straightforward at all today. She was wishy-washy and like a woman. Something's still not right. Mingzu crossed her arms and stared straight at him. Every time you're so attentive, something bad must be going on. When you speak, feel your conscience. Li looked at her and frowned. Ask yourself, when have I ever harmed you? When Li opened his mouth, he naturally looked in the direction of her conscience. Feeling his gaze, Mingzu thought of the bowl of soup she had just drunk. She felt uncomfortable all over. She put her hands down from her chest, but she didn't know where to put them. Finally, she looked at him in embarrassment and walked towards the brothel. How can one pacify the world if one's chest is not clear? Li shook his head. He felt that there must be a deeper meaning behind heaven's arrangement. At the very least, the eldest princess had taken the first step on the road to pacify the world. The old emperor had a lot of fun today. Li could see that the smile on his face had never stopped. In this half a day he was not the high and mighty ruler of a country, but just an ordinary father. He would let Yongning ride on his neck to watch the circus. He would also beam with joy when the Tsundra Lolita fed him a milk candy. He would walk on the streets for 4 hours, but he was still full of energy. When it was time for lunch, he even let Changda serve him 3 bowls of food. He didn't look like a seriously ill person at all. He could eat and walk, and he was in a good state. Of course, the most important reason was that the food he cooked was delicious. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he was still lying on Li Yi's rocking chair. He squinted his eyes and swayed back and forth. The eldest princess was massaging his shoulders from behind. Emperor Jing's face showed a satisfied expression. I finally know why you would rather be idle at home than to enter the court and become an official. If you can be so comfortable every day, I wouldn't exchange it for a god. Li Yi tried hard not to show a contemptuous expression. He hadn't done anything yet, but his days were already comfortable. As the dignified ruler of a country, how could he act like a bumpkin who had never seen the world? No matter what, he should at least have afternoon tea and a few pieces of osmanthus cake to relieve his boredom. Emperor Jing closed his eyes and said faintly, "You're the one behind the Cui family's matter, right?" There was nothing to hide. The old emperor knew that the largest glass mine in the Jing kingdom was under his house. He couldn't hide it even if he wanted to. Your Majesty, don't worry. The taxes that should be paid will not be less. It was a good habit to pay taxes. It was also a hush money. The old emperor had been unhappy with the Cui family for a long time. Since he could vent his anger and get money, he certainly wouldn't have any objection. It's getting late. It's time to go back to the palace. Emperor Jing opened his eyes and stood up from the rocking chair. He didn't mention this matter until he left with Yongning and Shanning. When the eldest princess left, she looked back at him. Li knew what it meant. Sometimes he really hoped that she was a man. In this way, a lot of unnecessary trouble could be avoided. But when he thought that she was really a man, he felt a little disappointed. A long time ago he already had a plan and was carrying it out step by step. However, the road ahead was difficult and dangerous. It had not really manifested until now. Moreover, even if he overcome all the difficulties and obstacles and achieved the result he expected, was that result really what she wanted? In fact, Li Yi's heart was still a little confused. She has already left. Why are you still looking? A faint voice came from the side. Li Yi turned around and saw Mississippi Lu holding her sword and leaning against the moon door. Who won just now? When Li Yi was cooking, the old emperor and the 2 little girls were playing in the front yard. Mississippi Lu and the eldest princess went to the backyard. When she came out alone, her clothes were a little messy. Not surprisingly, they should have sparred for a while. After all, among the people of the same age, only the 2 of them could be each other's opponents. Mississippi Lu didn't answer, which meant that she didn't win. It seemed to be the same result last time. For Mississippi Lu, who had always swept away her peers, it might be a little hard to accept that she couldn't win against another girl of the same age. Especially in a situation where she couldn't win in terms of appearance and strength. Girls of this age like to compete in everything. Li could understand. He looked at her and comforted her. Don't be discouraged. At least you are older than her. Mississippi Lu looked up at him with a trace of doubt in her eyes. What did you say? I said, you seem to be a few days older than her? Li looked at her and smiled. I made soup. Do you want to drink some? Chapter 760. Recently, Li Yi was keen on making soup. This work was not as simple as putting a bunch of ingredients in water to boil. The proportion of various ingredients, the amount of water, the heat, the time, and changing any of the parameters, the taste might change qualitatively. In this aspect, he was already very experienced. Of course, the love poured into the soup could not be described by the amount. Rui's soup nourished the fetus. and xuanhuan soup was beneficial to the growth of puberty girls. Although Mississippi Lu did not need to grow any more, it was not bad to drink more. The one who needed to grow the most was actually the eldest princess more than xuanhuan. Therefore, when Li Yi entered the palace, he brought her a full cup. Eating egg fried rice with a delicious soup that could nourish one's body would be better. Eating egg fried rice with wine didn't sound like a good thing. How is it? This soup tastes good, right? Egg fried rice was a little greasy, and this soup could relieve the greasy feeling. More importantly, it could also grow the body. Emingzi nodded. Soup with rice was indeed better, but after experiencing something, whenever soup was mentioned, she would think of something that made people blush. She looked at Li Yi with some vigilance and asked, "This soup? What's the use?" "To relieve greasy feeling, it's not good to drink all the time." Li Yi looked at her and said indifferently, "Don't worry, it's not poisonous." As he spoke, he poured himself a bowl and started to drink by himself. Mingzhu's doubts disappeared, but she felt a little guilty. She really should not have doubted him just now. Li Yi took out a piece of paper and said, "This is for you." Li Mingzhu took it and looked at it. She found that what was written on it was exactly what he had told her yesterday. It was just that it was more organized and clear. As for the more specific and detailed things, he had deliberately omitted them. "Just hand it over like this." Li Yi was worried that she would blurt out all the details on her own, so he reminded her of something else. Emingzi did not ask much. She knew that he did this for a reason. This matter was beneficial to the country and the people. He would not harm her. Emingzi looked at him and asked, "How do you get the money?" "It's a secret for now." Li Yi didn't tell her directly, not because he didn't trust her, but because he trusted her too much. This silly girl's kung fu was quite powerful, but her mind was actually very simple. She could not hide anything in her heart. If he really solved all the problems and then revealed everything, what would they have to do with it? "I'm leaving. I'll come find you in a few days." Li Yi waved his hand and leisurely walked out of the morning dew hall. "County Marquis Li treats His Highness very well," the figure standing behind Emingzi suddenly said when he saw Li Yi walk out. What she meant was not limited to him bringing the princess's favorite food every time he came. In fact, the things he did for the princess were much more than that. He made a princess, a woman, step by step become an existence that even the men in the court could not underestimate. No one dared to question why the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom was still not married, and no one questioned why she could become the dean of the women's college. She led a group of noble ladies in the capital and did many things that men could not do. She also let those people know what it meant to be a woman not inferior to a man. Emingzi did not directly respond. She looked out of the hall and finished the egg-fried rice. After drinking a bowl of soup, she put down the jade spoon and said, "There is still some soup left." "I can't drink it." "Nanny, drink it. Don't waste it." The old woman smiled. She knew that Emingzi did not want to waste County Marquis Li's kindness. She took a bowl and scooped out the last bowl of soup. After drinking a mouthful, she smacked her lips. Her expression suddenly froze. Before the princess was born, she had always been by the empress's side. She had personally served the empress for more than 10 years and watched the empress grow from a little girl to a woman. Naturally, she knew what this familiar taste of the soup had. Emingzi looked at her with some confusion and asked, "What's wrong?" The old woman put down the bowl and looked at her meaningfully. She said, "This soup is only useful for His Highness to drink. I'd better not drink it." It was late at night. The hall of diligent government was silent. Occasionally there was the sound of pages turning. Changde walked out of the shadows. He coughed lightly and reminded, "Your Majesty, it's time to rest." "Changde, tell me, am I really old?" Emperor Jing put down a memorial. It was hard to tell whether his expression was gratified or lonely. "Your Majesty is in the prime of your life." "Why do you say that?" Changde's voice finally had some emotion. "If Emingzi was a man, why would I do this today?" Emperor Jing seemed to be talking to himself. He picked up the memorial and read it again carefully. Everything was clear and extremely comprehensive. He couldn't help but murmur, "These were all thought of by Emingzi alone? That boy is right. I am indeed old. The future of the Jing kingdom is still in the hands of these young people." At this moment, Changde roughly guessed what he meant. In terms of writing poems and lyrics, His Majesty was not as good as County Earl Li. In terms of martial arts, His Majesty was not as good as the eldest princess. However, His Majesty had always been good at governing the country. When one day he found that he was not as good as others in these matters, it was not strange for him to sigh like he did just now. Changde thought for a while and said, "Her Royal Highness is also worried about His Majesty." I'm afraid that County Earl Li also contributed a lot. It's not the first time that he gave all the credit to Mingzu. A trace of anger appeared on Emperor Jing's face. He said, "This brat, if he had taken out these things earlier, I wouldn't have had a headache for so long." As Emperor Jing spoke, he waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Leave this matter to Mingzu. I'm also happy to be idle." He was very confident in Mingzhu's ability. Since this matter was proposed by her, he would leave it to her. In this way he would also be much more relaxed. The most important issue was the funding. The higher-ups only said that there was no need to allocate funds from the national treasury. As for where the huge sum of money would come from, he didn't care so much. Someone would always have a way. As if thinking of something, Emperor Jing suddenly said, "Do you think he has any thoughts about Mingzu? If Li Yi didn't have a wife, he would even think it was a good thing. But it was impossible for a princess of a country to be a concubine. Her Royal Highness and he have known each other for a long time. He is also indebted to her." Changde thought for a while and said, "As for other things, it shouldn't be." Naturally, he couldn't say much about this kind of thing. With Mingzhu's age, if it was another princess, she would have gotten married long ago. But she always has her own ideas. I don't know her thoughts, so I can't help her decide. If it was someone else, it wouldn't matter, but that brat. Emperor Jing frowned. After muttering a few words, he shook his head and showed a relaxed smile on his face. "It's getting late. Let's rest." Although there was still some loneliness in her heart, this was the child's heart. The child had grown up and could finally help her father share some things. "It's done?" Li Yi looked at Mingzu and couldn't help but ask. Mingzu didn't speak but nodded. Although he didn't know why she didn't seem to be in a good mood and the way she looked at him was a little strange, it was always worth being happy that the plan had taken a big step forward. Drink soup, drink soup." Li Yi filled another bowl for her. Mingzu looked at him and there was a trace of shame and anger on her face. She lowered her head slightly. Seeing that she didn't seem to want to drink, Li Yi was stunned. Then he shook his head and didn't care about it. He said, "Forget it, I will bring it back for Xuanhuan to drink. The food is still complete. I will also bring this soup bowl back. The next time I come, I will return it." After all, whether the Princess Royal grew up or not had little to do with him. The little servant girl was in the puberty period and her nutrition had to keep up. Seeing him stand up and prepare to leave, Mingzhu's face showed the same color as a peach blossom. She gritted her teeth and said, "Put it down." Chapter 761. The Emperor's condition seemed to have improved. The morning court, which had not been held for a long time, reopened today. This was the first time in several months. The officials were in high spirits and did not dare to be negligent. They stood in front of the palace gates before dawn, waiting. The morning court had not been held for a long time. Originally, they thought that there would be a lot of important matters accumulated. They did not know when it would end today. However, in less than an hour, all the officials lined up and walked out of the political hall. The emperor's body might not be able to hold on. Even in the past, it was rare to end a meeting so early. 2 provinces had been hit by floods half a month ago. The losses were not small. The emperor ordered the Ministry of Revenue to allocate silver as soon as possible for disaster relief. He also sent officials from the Imperial Water Surveillance to deal with the floods. This should be the most urgent matter. However, similar disasters were experienced almost every year. There would not be any big mistakes if they were done step by step. After that, it was some trivial matters of the various departments. Since it was the morning court, something had to be said. Otherwise, it would be awkward for everyone to stand there and make it seem like they had no work to do. In addition, he ordered the Ministry of Rights to assist the princess in supervising the construction of the county schools. There was also a small reform of the imperial examinations. It was something that everyone was concerned about. Although he had failed many times, the emperor did not seem to have given up on the suppression of some powerful families. There was still a long distance from the political hall to the yamen of the various departments. The officials gathered in 2s and 3s and discussed the matters of the morning court. Daxing County School. His Majesty is opening the door to the poor again? Didn't they do this a few years ago? In the end, it was still left unsettled. It's difficult. If we want to build more academies for the provinces, we need to hire more teachers, ink, paper, and books. We haven't even counted the academies. All of this requires silver. Can the national treasury take out that much? Who knows? The emperor didn't say that it would be from the national treasury. He only said that the eldest princess would be in charge of this matter. Can the eldest princess take out so much silver? If it was a year or half a year ago, the focus of their debate would be that although the princess was of noble status, she was only a woman. What right did she have to participate in national affairs? However, at this moment no one dared to say this. The last person who had questioned her had his spine broken by the people of the capital. A great scholar of a generation ended up being disgraced and his reputation destroyed. Countless people would sigh when they thought of it. In this year, the eldest princess's brilliance was too dazzling. She had brought back Tianfa and helped the Jing kingdom defeat the Qi kingdom. Even now, the Jing kingdom was still deeply intimidated. Later on, she had defeated the envoy of the Qi kingdom and saved the face of the country. Later on, the Women's Union and the Women's Academy had even promoted the national policy of not marrying before the age of 16. They had trained female midwives, which reduced the chances of a woman dying from dystocia by several times. All of these things were enough to convinced. Up until now, they wouldn't be surprised if the eldest princess's shadow appeared in court affairs. But as for whether she could handle this matter well, no one had any expectations in their hearts. After all, even His Majesty had encountered irresistible obstacles in this matter, let alone the eldest princess, a woman. Not to mention other obstacles, just the amount of silver needed was not a small amount. If she couldn't solve this problem, it would be a joke. Perhaps it was because they saw through this that the officials with deep backgrounds didn't show any displeased expression. Supporting the poor was naturally suppressing the influential families. His Majesty's display of this intention showed that he was dissatisfied with them. The big families, who had always been close to the royal family, were not afraid. Their status in the court was guaranteed by the royal family. But for the Chui family and other families, things were not so simple. At least in the current court they were not so stable. An official said in a low voice, "These years the court has changed a lot. Is His Majesty still not satisfied?" "Don't worry. Haven't we already experienced such things?" A middle-aged man next to him showed a disdainful smile and said, "This time there will be no end. Even His Majesty can't do it." "Eldest princess, Yeah, the most important thing is where the silver comes from." One person nodded and said, "If it's only in the capital, it won't affect the overall situation. But if it covers all the provinces, I'm afraid the national treasury won't be able to afford it. I'd like to see what eldest princess plans to use to fill this bottomless pit." Her Royal Highness's business is doing well, but this time, the shining silver is destined to go down the drain. As soon as one person said this, he was pulled by the arm by the person next to him. The person's gaze was extremely obscure. That person looked back and saw the gloomy face of one of the important figures of the Chui family. His heart immediately thumped and he thought, "This is bad." Wasn't mentioning this in front of the Chui family rubbing salt in their wounds? Everyone knew that the Chui family had suffered heavy losses because of the glass incident. The exhibition was not held and the glass they had hoarded was smashed to pieces in front of everyone. According to insiders, this time the Chui family would probably lose millions of taels of silver. In terms of losses, who could compete with the Chui family? Not daring to look at that official Chui again, he looked back at the eldest princess who had just walked out. A strange look appeared in his eyes and he quickly walked forward. "It seems that no one is optimistic about you. Li Yi rarely attended court today." He walked beside Mingzu. With his current hearing ability, it was not difficult for him to hear what the people in front of him were talking about. For the eldest princess it was even less difficult. "Just watch." Mingzu looked back at him and said lightly. Li Yi heard this and was stunned. He didn't know whether he should be touched or helpless. This matter had been arranged in front of hundreds of officials. There was no way back. The silver had not been settled yet, but she was actually not anxious at all. She didn't think, what if he was bragging? However, the feeling of being trusted was not bad. Li Yi looked back at her and comforted her. "Don't worry. If you don't have money you can cheat some more." "What did you say?" Mingzu looked back at him. "I said if you don't have money you can earn some more." Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, "You also know that I am very good at making money. This little money is just for sprinkling water." There seemed to be someone waiting in front. When he saw the two coming, he bowed slightly and said, "Your Highness." Then he looked at Li Yi and nodded slightly. Li Yi also smiled back. The head of the Wang family was an old friend who had friendly cooperation with him. Mingzu looked at him and asked, "May I know what's the matter, Official Wang?" The relationship between the Wang family and the royal family had always been close. Although she was a princess, she would not be too arrogant in front of the head of the Wang family. "Your Highness wants to build the county school. It is a good thing for the country and the people. The Wang family is willing to donate 100,000 taels of silver to contribute to this matter." 100,000 taels of silver was not a small amount. When Li Yi gave it to Mississippi Liu, he hesitated for a moment. The Wang family actually took it out so easily. They were indeed the wealthiest family in the Jing kingdom. They were full of confidence. However, thinking of how much they had earned these days, it was normal for them to take out some money to show their love. Mingzu was also stunned when she heard this. Then she said with a smile, "I appreciate the Wang family's kindness. However, I have already made arrangements for this matter. There is no need for official Wang to worry." She knew that Li Yi did not want others to interfere in this matter. Moreover, he had just said that the money was just a sprinkle of water to him. Sprinkle of water should mean that it was not worth mentioning, right? The head of the Wang family was only surprised for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "In that case I will leave first." Li Yi turned his head and looked at her in a daze. His face was full of disbelief. Being stared at by him and thinking of the effects of the soup, Mingzu felt that a certain part of her body was a little strange. This feeling was unprecedented. She blushed and asked, "Why are you looking at me?" Li Yi touched his forehead with one hand, and reached out with the other to touch hers. She did not have a fever. Could it be that after drinking too much of that soup, a certain part of her body would grow and her intelligence would decrease? "What are you doing?" Mingzu swatted his hand away and said angrily. Li Yi had no time to admire the eldest princess's rare angry look. He took off and chased after the head of the Wang family. "Official Wang, wait, don't go, let's discuss what happened just now." "Old Wang, stop." Chapter 762. "Lose, you, why are you so?" Li Yi bade farewell to the master of the Wang family. When he walked back, he looked at Mingzu and said with disappointment, 200,000 taels of silver, how many academies can be built, how many pens and papers can be bought, and how many teachers can be hired? How can you just reject it like that?" In the end, he did not say the word wastrel. After all, she was not Mississippi Liu, and it was not her family that was going to lose. But strictly speaking, this matter was jointly proposed by the two of them. It was the crystallization of their love, and it was their child. As a father, he had the right to fight for more and better benefits for his child. "What did you say to Lord Wang just now?" Mingzu looked at him and asked in confusion. When the master of the Wang family left just now, his face was full of smiles and he was obviously in a good mood. She could not think of a reason that could make the person who gave out 100,000 taels of silver so happy. Then she realized another problem. Looking at Li Yi, she asked uncertainly, "You just said 200,000 taels of silver?" "The Wang family has already agreed to donate 200,000 taels of silver." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "But don't make this matter known for now. Doesn't His Majesty want the Ministry of Rights to help you? Let them first. Will this work?" Mingzu looked at him and asked with a frown. If this was the method he was talking about, then this matter would probably encounter unimaginable resistance. "Of course not." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Do you think others are as stupid as the Wang family? Why should they give us money for nothing? I have already made a list for you. When the time comes, let the officials of the Ministry of Rights visit them one by one. They will definitely not donate money. But you don't have to be angry. This is all in our plan. If you want to hear it, I will tell you now." Mingzu waved her hand and said, "Next time. I have to accompany my mother later. I will leave first." Li Yi had originally planned to tell her all the plans. Hearing this, he was slightly startled and looked at her in surprise. Shouldn't she be eager to know all the plans? When did she become so unmotivated? She could help him once or twice or even 8 or 10 times, but she couldn't help him forever. "This is such an important matter, can't you show a little bit of enthusiasm?" The sound of her footsteps gradually faded away. Li Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He shouted at her back, "The soup I brought for you is in the cafeteria. Don't forget to get it." With that, he walked towards the palace gate. Mingzhu's body trembled and she stopped in her tracks. An unnatural blush appeared on her face. Originally, he wanted to spend a few days in peace in the future and not care about the matters in the court. But sometimes he couldn't stay idle. Fortunately, he was only helping the eldest princess with these things. He just gave her some ideas and the rest was up to her. Li Yi's skill in making soup had improved by leaps and bounds. He would change it every day. Yesterday he had heard Xuanhuan and Rui say that her chest had been warm recently. Was she sick? She was too embarrassed to tell him these words. Li Yi could only tactfully tell her through Rui that it was normal for a girl to feel this way when she was growing. Xuanhuan was almost 17. In another 2 years, the little servant girl would become the senior servant girl. Of course, making soup was just a hobby for a while. What he liked to do the most was to sit in front of Rui after giving her a massage. He would put his ear on her lower abdomen and the two of them would talk about the private matters between husband and wife, including what name the child should be named and how to educate them. Of course, there was one point that the two of them tacitly agreed on. Whether it was a boy or a girl, they had to be skilled in both the pen and the sword. They didn't have to worry about this because they had a father who was skilled in both the pen and the sword. But if they wanted to learn martial arts, Rui would be reluctant to be too strict with them. If they wanted to succeed, they needed Mississippi Lu. But if she was too strict, it might scare the child. No, he had to think about it carefully. Many officials from the Ministry of Rights visited the officials and nobles in the capital one by one. They hoped that they could contribute to the development of education in the Jing Kingdom. They wanted to donate some money to build more academies so that the children who couldn't afford to study could have a chance to change their fate. The officials from the Ministry of Rights visited them personally. Out of understanding, they couldn't let them return empty-handed. Therefore, they really donated some silver. 100 taels, 200 taels, and 300 taels were considered too much. A minister only donated 50 taels. It was said that a minister counselor of the Ministry of Rights walked around the Chui family and didn't even drink a cup of tea. It couldn't be said that they were stingy. After all, after the last audit, all the officials more or less donated money to the national treasury. Some even donated their family's wealth. It hadn't been that long. They couldn't ask the officials and nobles to donate money every time the court lacked money. After all, this wasn't a long-term plan. Even if they didn't donate money, they had a valid reason that everyone could understand. Moreover, the emperor supported the poor. It was a terrible idea to ask the people from the Ministry of Rights to go to the rich families or the families of the officials related to them to raise money. Even if they had money, they wouldn't donate it. Her Royal Highness was only a woman after all. They thought she would have some brilliant plan, but according to the current situation, this matter was nothing more than a joke in the end. Even the Ministry of Rights had advised the emperor that they didn't want to participate in this matter anymore. Not only were they unpopular, they couldn't raise money, so it would be futile. They were usually very busy with work and didn't need to waste time on these things. Xianxia sat on the stone bench and held a cup of hot tea in his hand. He slowly said, "Although the eldest princess is powerful, she is still a woman. How can she easily solve something that even the emperor can't do?" Now, his treatment here had changed from herbal tea to hot tea. This was a great improvement for him. Although the woman across from him still didn't want to talk to him and it was almost all him talking alone, after the court session, being able to sit here and talk for a while, even if it was just talking to himself, talking about some things in the court or old events, even if he didn't get any response, it was enough to calm his heart. Tseng Zumo's eyelashes fluttered and she suddenly said, "Her Royal Highness is an extraordinary woman. Maybe she really has a way." Her tone inevitably had a different meaning. Even if Her Royal Highness had no way, there would be someone who would help her find a way and help her solve all the problems properly and perfectly. There was no doubt about this. Because he was always like that. Ahem ahem. The sudden voice startled Xianxia and he almost choked on the tea in his mouth. He raised his head in disbelief. This was the first time she had taken the initiative to talk to him for so many days. He wiped the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. After coming back to his senses, he hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, Her Royal Highness has created many miracles. Maybe this time, everyone will be impressed." In 3 days she raised 2,000 taels. Emperor Jing rubbed his eyebrows and looked down. He said, "The Ministry of Rights is quite dissatisfied with this. They think this is too absurd. Mingzu, what do you think?" The slender figure standing below thought for a moment and said, "In that case, there is no need to trouble the Ministry of Rights anymore. Father, rest assured I will think of a way." A curious expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Even with the Wang family's 200,000 taels, it is far from enough. What do you think? Tell me. Mingzi looked up at him and said softly, "He didn't say, who?" Emperor Jing was stunned for a moment before he seemed to understand something. He waved his hand and said, "Father knows. You can go now." Seeing Mingzi walk out of the door, Emperor Jing sighed and leaned back in his chair. He sighed and said, "I am old. It seems that I am really old." Changde came out and asked, "Do you want me to bring him here?" "There is no need." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "I don't care what method he uses to get so much money. Anyway, I don't have to worry about it. If things are not done well, be careful of his butt." Emperor Jing looked at the sky and said, "It is not early. It is not easy to rest early. Today, go to concubine Yan's place. Changde nodded and a smile appeared on his old face. His Majesty had not rested so early for a long time. If that boy took the initiative, many political affairs would not need His Majesty to worry about. Unfortunately, Changde suddenly looked in the direction of the eldest princess's departure and thought. Chapter 763. There was a heated discussion in the capital these days, and the scope of the discussion was very wide. Even the poor farmers, who usually did not care much about state affairs, often went into the city to inquire about the construction of the academy. They heard that after the academy was built, the children of the poor would be able to study for free. Their children would be 7 years old next year. Would they be able to study in the academy in the future? The farmers who had eaten the last meal and had to worry about the next, should be most concerned about the problem of food. They had never cared about state affairs, and no matter what the higher-ups did, as long as they could eat their fill and survive in this world, that was the first thing they thought about when they woke up every day. But this time they had to be concerned. If what the eldest princess was doing was successful, their children would not have to repeat the life of their fathers like them. They could go to the academy to study and be scholars. In the future, if they could become the top scholar and become a high-ranking official, they would bring honor to their ancestors and their families. In their view, scholars were all going to become the top scholar and become a high-ranking official. Although Scholar Wu at the entrance of the village had not become the top scholar, everyone in the village who saw him had to respectfully call him Duke Scholar. In short, no matter what status they had in the past, as long as they studied, everything would be different. This was a joyous occasion. Her Royal Highness had done something good for them again. First, she had summoned her own daughter and allowed her entire family to have a full meal. Now she had even allowed their sons to study. They did not know how many things the current emperor had done for them, but Her Royal Highness was really speaking up for these poor commoners. Building an academy required money, and Her Royal Highness ran around to raise money for them. However, those rich officials did not seem to be willing, and it seemed that the matter of building an academy could not be carried out. This was the situation that they learned after entering the city. Their money isn't at all from the wealth of the people? They really want to do things for the commoners. All of them have become misers. An old farmer held onto his walking stick and kept hitting the ground, his face full of resentment. This is an opportunity for the children, they can't be like us. Someone gritted his teeth and said, they must study, only after studying can they have a future. One of them shook his head and sighed. Sigh? They are all cruel and unscrupulous. The one who truly cares about the poor people is still the Princess Royal Highness. A carriage slowly passed by on the street. After all these days, the old man driving the carriage already understood that the wide road was always blocked by traffic. In order to not waste time, they had to take a long detour and take another clear path. Then he would stop at the entrance of an alley. Sometimes he would stop for a quarter of an hour, and sometimes he would stop for as long as an hour. Fong and the sloppy old man sat on either side of the carriage, thinking about what they had just heard on the street. They lifted the curtain and said to Li Yi, "Young master, these officials are so stingy that they won't even pay this little bit of money." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't say that. Other people's money doesn't come from the strong wind, and they don't want to be blown away by the strong wind. It's their freedom to donate or not, and we can't control it. Don't engage in moral coercion." Fong nodded, not fully understanding. Although he didn't know what moral coercion meant, he knew that his silver was picked up from the sand, sent to him by others and cheated from the Qi kingdom. It seemed that it was not as convenient as the strong wind, and he didn't want to give it to others for free. Li Yi jumped off the carriage and walked into the alley. The sloppy old man habitually threw a milk candy into his mouth and looked in a certain direction. How long is he going to do this? Fong took a candy from the sloppy old man's hand and murmured. The sloppy old man glanced at him, put the remaining milk candy back into his arms and asked, "Soon what?" Fong glanced at him and said, "Soon means soon." These days when the son-in-law passed by here, the expression on his face was completely different from before. He had carefully observed him for many days, and could naturally see some subtle emotions. The sloppy old man seemed to understand something and asked, "Say, between your family's young miss and the young lady in here, who do you think he likes more?" Fong looked at him in surprise. He didn't expect this eccentric old man to be so passionate on the inside, to be interested in this kind of thing. "There's no comparison." Fong shook his head and said, "The son-in-law likes the young miss because the young miss is the young miss and not someone else. He likes Miss Zeng because he likes her." "What do you mean?" The sloppy old man was stunned for a moment, and after pondering for a while, he still didn't understand. Then, as if he had thought of something, he looked at him with some mockery. Are you talking about yourself? Fang glanced at him. What does that have to do with me? Don't think I don't know that you have a lover in the Jade's courtyard. Why didn't you go look for her today? Fang's face suddenly changed and he said angrily, You followed me. The sloppy old man looked at him disdainfully. Who doesn't know about your trivial matters? Trivial matters? Fang actually wasn't angry anymore. Looking at you, I'm afraid you've never been liked by anyone before, right? This sentence seemed to touch on the sloppy old man's reverse scale, and he immediately glared at Fang. What? Why don't you go to the Wu Kingdom and ask around? When this old man was young, he could be considered elegant, and many women fell in love with him. If it weren't for the fact that I was obsessed with martial arts. So you never married in your life? Fang looked at him with a smile. The sloppy old man didn't speak and narrowed his eyes at him. If it weren't for the fact that he had been cultivating his mind these days, he would have already smacked him with his palm. However, he couldn't casually smack this guy in front of him, so he didn't care about this. The sloppy old man thought for a while, and continued with the previous question. What if your family's second miss is added? Second miss? This question was a bit complicated. Fang was startled and looked up at the sky, feeling that today's sunlight was a bit dazzling. Li Yi sat at the stone table, took a sip of tea and asked, The Chui family's ready-made clothing stores are all closed, right? Zheng Zumo looked up at him and nodded slightly. These days she had also faintly heard some news that the Chui family had lost a lot of money and mortgaged many stores in the capital, including those ready-made clothing stores which hadn't been open for a long time. These days they had also made some adjustments to their strategy. Even if there were more counterfeits, there would be corresponding countermeasures. I heard that the eldest princess encountered some obstacles in building the Silver Academy? Li Yi thought she would ask specifically about the closure of the Chui family's ready-made clothing stores. He didn't know why she suddenly brought it up. He shook his head and said, Those are all appearances. Everything is going according to plan. Zheng Zumo looked at him and asked, Did you plan it? Of course, I didn't expect them to donate much money. The less they donate, the better. They are laughing at the eldest princess now, but they won't be able to laugh in a few days. After Li Yi finished speaking, he saw that she lowered her head and didn't speak. He thought for a moment and suddenly asked, Are you jealous? He Mrs. Jealous. Xiao Chui stood behind and said with a chuckle. Ever since she saw the two of them rolling on the bed that day, she could say some things in front of the two of them. The two of them were on the bed, one on top of the other. According to common sense, during the time she couldn't see, they should be rolling around. Xiao Chui, shut up. Zheng Zumo looked at Xiao Chui angrily, stood up and hurried to the studio. Li stood up and gently knocked on Xiao Chui's head. How can you talk about your own miss like that? How impudent! Xiao Chui covered her head, feeling wronged. You two just want to find a reason to be in the same room, and you're pretending so well? Li walked into the studio and saw that she was already sitting at the table. He explained, That's really just a facade. If they don't donate now, they will still donate in the future. They even have to beg me to donate? Don't say any more. Zheng Zumo hurriedly raised her head and said, Why are you telling me this? If someone else hears it, it will ruin your plan. We're on the same side, what are you afraid of? Li looked at her and said, But these words really can't be told to anyone else, or the consequences will be very serious. You can't tell that assistant minister Zheng either. I won't tell him. Zheng Zumo said firmly, then looked up at him and asked, What will the consequences be? Li thought about it and said, I will lose face and the Princess Royal will also lose face. Many people will laugh at her and most importantly we will lose a lot of silver. Zheng Zumo knew the concept of silver to him. If he said a lot of silver, then it really was a lot. Thinking that he was telling such an important thing to her, she couldn't help but feel a trace of warmth in her heart. How is it? I've told you such an important thing. Are you touched? Li walked over and looked at her with a smile. He opened his arms and asked, Are you touched enough to want a warm hug? That trace of warmth quickly disappeared. Zheng Zumo grabbed a pillow from the side of the bed and threw it at him. Pervert. She had learned this phrase from Yongning a long time ago. Yongning said that those who liked to take advantage of girls were all perverts. Chapter 764. When Li Yi pushed the door open again and walked out, he habitually held Xiao Chui's head with his hand. He knew that she had the habit of leaning on the door to eavesdrop. If she suddenly lost her support, it was very likely that she would fall to the ground. The girl was, after all, thin-skinned. After being caught again, she looked at Li Yi with some embarrassment. She blushed and said, "Li, are you leaving?" "I'm leaving." Li Yi patted her head and walked out of the courtyard. "Why don't you take your lover back and let her stay in the brothel alone? Do you feel at ease?" Next to the carriage, the sloppy old man was chattering. "Could it be that you are afraid of your wife, as they say?" Fang did not pay attention to the sloppy old man because he was still thinking about the question just now. Although he now boasted that he was a smart person, especially towards the son-in-law, he could see very clearly from the perspective of an outsider. However, the old man's question just now made it difficult for him to answer. Li got on the carriage and said, "Let's go to the palace." Fang sniffed and smelled a faint fragrance. He shook his head and waved his whip. The carriage slowly moved. When Li Yi stepped into the imperial garden, Jingdi was playing chess with the proud Lolita. Maybe it was because there was nothing to be busy with political affairs, but the old emperor was more and more leisurely and elegant recently. The proud Lolita no longer played chess with others. She had already understood that the rules of the chess were set by herself. She was invincible in the palace. Even if Li Yi met her, he would have to retreat. They were playing 5 in a row. Li Yi stood by and watched for a while. He couldn't help but sigh. The proud Lolita's thinking was really quick. It seemed that she had a high talent in all kinds of chess. When Jingdi put a black piece in a position that he thought was suitable, the proud Lolita had already put it down. Then she said with a smile, "Father, you lost again. Today I can go out of the palace to play." Jingdi waved his hand helplessly and said, "Xianxia, you go play first. Father wants to say a few words to the teacher." The arrogant Lolita stood up, winked at Li Yi and ran away quickly. Emperor Jing pointed to the chessboard in front of him and stretched out his hand. "Let's play?" Since he couldn't beat that Tsundra Loli, did he think he couldn't beat him? Emperor Jing was still holding a black chess piece. He placed a chess piece in the center of the chessboard and said, "What are you doing here instead of solving the problem of the academy?" Li Yi didn't bother with pleasantries and went straight to the point. "I would like to ask for 2 paintings from your majesty." "My calligraphy?" A surprised expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Although he was not considered a master of calligraphy, he was still the ruler of a country. His calligraphy treasures were not inferior to any other masters in terms of value. He would often give them to some meritorious officials, but this was the first time someone had directly asked him for it. Naturally, he didn't think that Li Yi liked his calligraphy. In the entire Jing kingdom, the number of people who could surpass him in calligraphy could be counted on one hand. The first thought that came to his mind was that Li Yi wanted to sell it for money. "If you win against me, I will give it to you." These days, the only thing that could trouble him was the matter of the academy. However, with Emingzu and Li Yi around, he didn't have to worry about it anymore. He simply played chess to kill time. Compared to the Tsundra Loli, Emperor Jing's level of playing Gamoku was still very high, even though he hadn't been exposed to this form of chess for a long time. With something on his mind, Li Yi naturally couldn't concentrate on playing chess. His level of Gamoku could only be said to be average. Moreover, this was not something that could be achieved by digesting a few chess records. There were also various accidental factors. At this time he was absent-minded and lost 3 games in a row. When he collected the chess pieces again, Emperor Jing glanced at him and said lightly, "Be more serious. If you can't beat me today, don't even think about the calligraphy." The matter of the academy had almost fermented enough. It was time to move on to the next step of the plan. Li Yi also planned to find the eldest princess after getting his calligraphy. The 2 of them would go out of the palace to do something. Just now they had already wasted a lot of time. There was no time to play chess with him, especially when he was at a disadvantage after more than half of the chess pieces were gone. He knew that he couldn't go on like this. It was time to show his real skills. So he raised his head and stared at the sky behind Emperor Jing. Emperor Jing looked at the chessboard. Seeing that he didn't move for a long time, he thought that he was thinking. After waiting for a while, seeing that he still hadn't made a move, he raised his head and saw that Li Yi's eyes were staring straight ahead, as if there was something behind him. Emperor Jing looked back and saw that it was empty. He looked at Li Yi and asked doubtfully, "What are you looking at?" "There is a cloud there," Li Yi said. "What about the cloud?" Emperor Jing's voice was even more doubtful. "Plot. Yes, what about the cloud? Isn't it just a cloud?" Li Yi shook his head and retracted his gaze. The chess piece in his hand finally fell on a certain position on the chessboard. He looked at Emperor Jing with a smile on his face. "Your Majesty, you have lost." Emperor Jing lowered his head and saw that the white chess pieces on the chessboard had already formed a 5-star alignment. He seemed to think of something and looked back at the sky behind him again. The cloud, the sky was blue. Where did the cloud come from? He looked back at Li Yi and asked, "Where is the cloud you were talking about?" Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked doubtfully, "What cloud?" In the end, the old emperor was willing to concede defeat and gave Li Yi what he wanted. He wanted a few more pieces and sold them when he was short of money in the future. However, the old emperor looked at him with a strange expression. He had to follow the original plan and let him write a few words before running away. Through this matter, he discovered another thing. The old emperor's chess skills were bad and he couldn't afford to lose. Li Yi rubbed the proud Lolita's head and said, "Be good. Today teacher and your royal sister have something to do and can't play with you. Just stay in the palace. No, Yongning has been summoned by her highness. There is no one to play with me." The proud Lolita hugged Li Yi's arm and said with a sobbing tone, "I am alone in the palace. It is very lonely." Such a young child actually knew about loneliness. Li Yi couldn't refuse no matter what. He could only nod helplessly and said, "Then follow me." The sobbing tone in the Lolita's voice immediately disappeared. An excited expression appeared on her face. "Then let's go find my royal sister now." Li Yi was a little dazed as she led him to the morning dew hall. He only felt that there was no sincerity left in this world. Women who practiced martial arts usually maintained their figures very well. If it was those who were obsessed with martial arts, there was not a single extra thing on their bodies. It was as if they were made by nature. Of course, those who were born with a certain deficiency could not make up for it through practicing martial arts. The flesh on their bodies could be reduced, but it would never be increased. Even though he knew that she had only been drinking the soup for a few days and that it shouldn't have much effect, Li Yi still faintly had an illusion. His gaze subconsciously looked towards a certain part of the eldest princess's body that was dancing with her sword. Women were always particularly sensitive to certain parts of their bodies and could easily feel other people's gazes. The eldest princess who was dancing with her sword suddenly increased in speed. Li Yi reached out and used his middle and index fingers to clamp a long sword. He smiled and said, "Don't mess around." She didn't have any evil intentions. The speed of the sword was not fast and the direction was perfectly straight. Li Yi felt that the scene of him clamping her sword with his hand must be very cool. Teacher is so amazing. The Tsundra Lolita was always so cooperative. Her eyes flashed with little stars and the look of worship made his vanity a little satisfied. Emingzu put away the long sword and looked at him. She asked, "Where is the thing?" "What thing?" Li Yi was stunned for a moment before he remembered something. He said, "That soup needs to be brewed for a long time. I came out in a hurry today and didn't have time to prepare it." Next time, the Tsundra Lolita shook Li Yi's arm and said in a sweet voice, "Teacher, my royal sister doesn't let me drink the soup you brought for her. Can you bring some for Xianning in the future?" Li Yi pinched her little face and said, "No, this kind of soup is not for children to drink." Mingzhu's face turned slightly red. He really knew the effects of that soup. So was he disdaining her? She glared at him vaguely. She walked over and opened something he placed on the table. "Father's handwriting?" She couldn't help but exclaim softly when she saw the 4 big words, Emingzu Academy, written on the paper. Li Yi was having a headache on how to explain to the Tsundra Lolita why that kind of soup could only be drunk by older girls and not younger girls. This was a false proposition because it was more effective for a growing girl than an older girl. But he couldn't really explain it like that. Seeing that she picked up the paper, he took the opportunity to walk over and said, "In the future, regardless of whether it's the capital or the other prefectures, the academies established will be called Emingzu Academy. The meaning is that these academies aim to cultivate brilliant talents like Emingzu for the country." The names of the academies were also very particular. It was very appropriate to use Emingzu as a metaphor for talents. It was easy to understand and meaningful. Of course, the reason why Li Yi gave the academy this name was not because of this. He wanted to let the students studying in these academies know that they could get rid of their poor lives and sit in the bright academy. They could have the opportunity to enter the court and bring honor to their ancestors. They could compete fairly with those powerful peers of the same age. These were all given to them by one person. This person was called Emingzuli. She was the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.